I think we're going to roll. They can join in. Good evening, everyone. This is Jayashree Vakil. I'm the president of Thai Austin, and welcome. We are expecting a lively and insightful discussion today with Krishna Srinivasan. He is the founding partner of Live Oak Venture Partners, and he is going to be shedding some light on entrepreneurship in a changing world, which is what we are facing today with the coronavirus situation. Welcome, Krishna. Appreciate your time here and your support here. Krishna Srinivasan is a co-founder of Live Oak Venture Partners and has been investing in early stage Texas-based companies and entrepreneurs since 2000. Correct me if I'm wrong, Krishna, here.
That's right.
Prior to founding Live Oak, Krishna was a partner at Austin Ventures, which was then Austin's go-to venture capital firm. And a lot of you probably already know about that. Before joining Austin Ventures, Krishna worked at Motorola and Symantec. He has an MBA from Wharton and is a proud Longhorn. He has an MS and a BS in actually the technical, mechanical and engineering from UT. And I love to say when somebody joins us as an alumni of UT, because we welcome them wholeheartedly. Thai Austin welcomes them wholeheartedly. Krishna is the chairman of the board of the Miracle Foundation, an international nonprofit for children. He's also on the board of the Entrepreneurs Foundation. Krishna and his wife, Raka, live in Austin and have 2 boys, both of whom are budding entrepreneurs and set to eclipse their dad in the coming years. Welcome, Krishna. Really, thank you for your time here. Tejas Vakil, who is the moderator for today, he is a charter member of Thai Austin and the CEO of Permissioned Networks. Before I turn it over to you, Tejas, I'm going to kind of divert from our standard setup here where the moderator asks the questions. I'm going to ask the first question to Krishna, if you don't mind. Krishna, and this is just for the benefit of our attendees here. Most people on this call probably know this, but for those that don't, can you please explain the difference between an angel investor, a venture capitalist, and a private equity investor, please?
Sure. What's common to all 3 of them are we all invest in private securities, unlike everyone invests in public markets, which are public tradable stock. In contrast, all 3 groups of people invest in private securities. Angel investors typically are investing out of their personal net worth, and often it's a combination of investment return expectations as well as they end up being some sort of a passion project. So angels typically come together with other groups of like-minded people, and you have the super active Central Texas Angel Network. And because they are passion projects and areas of interest, these investments start at incredibly early times for when they invest in a company. Venture capital is more of the institutional approach to what angels do. We are firms that actually raise capital from large institutions. Live Oak has got public pensions, or as well as university endowments and foundations, etc., that other investors in Live Oak. And we are a full life cycle investor. So we write our first check into a company at pretty early days, seed and Series A, or early investments. And then we typically get on the boards of these companies and stay the whole life cycle of these businesses. So we just bring a more institutional approach to doing these things. And the reason these institutions give us money is because they make the calculation on a risk reward adjusted basis that we're going to deliver them great returns for the risk our asset class entails. In one way, venture capital is a subset of private equity, which is the institutional approach to investing in private securities at private companies. But generally, when people think of private equity as distinctive from venture capital, those end up being investments in more later stage, more often in companies that are very established with some level of leverage in them. It might entail taking a company private, which is currently a public company. And so private equity in general entails the notion of financial engineering oriented investments in large businesses is typically what happens. And so that would be the continuum of angels invest super early, small checks, passion oriented, might not follow through. Venture is more full life cycle institution. And then PE ends up in a different collection of often non-technology oriented companies, which also involves a lot of leverage and debt as a part of the investment.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we do, folks, we do want this a lively discussion. And of course, our moderator is going to be in control of that. However, please do type in all your questions as they come to your mind under the question and answer section below, please. We are going to keep everybody muted until the moderator chooses to unmute someone and bring them up for asking a question or something like that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Tejas.
All right. Thank you very much, Krishna. Really good to talk to you. And let's just dive right in. Obviously, we're having this discussion in the context of the COVID-19 situation and also the larger social environment that we find ourselves in here over the last 3 or 4 weeks. About 2 months ago, the Silicon Valley Venture Capitalist Index, which is something that is a survey of VCs, mainly in the Valley. It's been going on for 16 years. 2 months ago, it reached its lowest point in terms of the confidence. And that was understandable given the current situation. I haven't seen the latest one. I don't think it has come out, but where do you see what's the level of confidence right now from your perspective?
We were going through this unprecedented boom in the venture business in terms of level of capital, level of investment underway. And obviously, we all think of this to be a black swan event, and an event that was unexpected, which completely took into a situation that was fairly heated up. And 2 months ago, it was definitely a situation where who knew when folks would ever come back out of hibernation, and definitely it felt much bleaker. Right. Portfolio companies are scrambling to figure out how do they adjust their operating plans to comprehend what was going on. I would say there is definitely a lot more, in optimism right now. People have been doing deals and a lot of investments have taken place. There was a report that came out today, for example, saying it's amazing that April and May were even a hotter clip in terms of total dollars that venture guys have put out compared to early part of the year. But of course, those stats get to be a little bit more skewed because people look at one big deal that happens and changes the numbers. Right. But in general, we are seeing people getting back to being in business. But definitely there's a lot of caution out there, but it's not as dire definitely as when the whole thing came together in the March timeframe in terms of how people are reacting to the situation today.
Were there any changes in the investing strategy or areas that you focus on specifically for Live Oak, given the situation? Obviously, as you say, it's a little bit more optimistic today than it was 2 months ago.
So for the benefit of folks here, we have a different strategy compared to the obviously any other venture firm, right? In the sense that we are completely focused on the way our investment strategy is to be first institutional money for what we call category leading companies that come out of Texas, management teams headquartered in Texas. And so we are blinders on looking at local companies here and like to be first investors and play a role through their life cycle. So in one way, nothing's changed. We are definitely look at things with the kind of the same lens as we always used to. Of course, we've been doing all our meetings over Zoom, which has been very different compared to what it used to be. But there are clearly some trends. One of the areas you can look at the stock market, how much the technology sector is massively held up, has been driving where S&P is today at 3,100 plus. So one of the things you can see from surveys that of corporations is that, look, and even though they all want to cut down expenses, technology investment is something that is not going down. People realize it's even more mission critical than before, especially with work from home kind of instances. So you're seeing cloud-based infrastructure, cloud-based software enable people to operate more efficiently, manage infrastructure more efficiently, help sales and marketing come together more efficiently, are all incredibly vibrant areas of investing, which are will continue to be of importance. So that's consistent with the areas we've always invested in this market. Texas in general is a tremendous enterprise software town.
Right.
And as a result, that's the kind of stuff we've been looking at. And that's the kind of stuff we continue to spend time in with respect to our new deal activity for us.
Okay. Just a reminder to the audience, if you do have questions, please put them on the Q&A panel, and I'll try and reach out to some of them. Krishna, there are two broad areas that I want to cover, and then we'll talk about other things too. But one is, obviously for potential or budding entrepreneurs, what the current funding situation looks like. And then for the young companies that are in startup mode, how do they deal with, and how have you helped, or how do the investors help those companies deal with the current situation?
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about the funding in general. There's obviously Live Oak strategy, and then sort of as you being the representative today of the investor community. Obviously, again, the situation is a little better today than it was 2 months ago. Obviously, there was a degree of caution. I've seen multiple studies where certain investors and venture capitalists have said this is an opportunity to look for certain groundbreaking areas to invest in, and others are saying let's be cautious. What should is there something that a budding entrepreneur should look for when they reach out and talk to you or talk to other investors?
Yeah, I think I want to make sure people realize at the macro outset here, right? There's plenty of money in the venture ecosystem with respect to venture funds, right? Venture funds have all raised tremendous amount of capital in the last 5 years.
Right.
And so as a result, money is there to be deployed. And venture firms are earning, capital is there, they're earning management fees and these things. So maybe there could be a temporary, momentary pause, but there will be money that gets deployed into companies sometime in the next 0 to 18 months here that will have to happen. Number two, also people should remember, if you go look at, I've been in the business now for 20 plus years. I joined the venture business beginning of 2000. So worked through the challenging times, Tejas, you were in early stage companies in 2000, right?
Yeah.
You go through, we all seen that downturn that happened in the 2000 timeframe, the big downturn that happened through 08, 09. Incredible companies have come out of companies that got funded right in the dips of those times. Take the last recession, you got Uber and Airbnb and and Stripe, and many of these things all were birthed during the time frame. So I think people who have been in the business a long time know that, look, you got to have a long-term perspective on these businesses, that you just cannot be looking at what happened to the market today and the Dow dropped 20 points and therefore we got to stop doing things should not be the attitude. So, I would broadly say people have a strong macro long-term positivity around what's going to happen. But having said that, right, there are companies today you question what's going to happen to purchase cycles for this company. Would it be viewed as discretionary purchase? I've seen companies which are much more around, let's say, trying to drive greater employee engagement or minimize employee attrition. In the next 9 to 12 months, employee attrition is not going to be a problem here to go deal with. And so maybe, it's not the right time frame to go double down on a company like that at this time. So it's going to be what kind of companies are relevant at this time in terms of, there is going to be enormous number of broader structural hiccups that buyers of technology in general will deal with. Is this in the right category here to capitalize on the appropriate tailwinds in the dislocations underway today? That's going to be an incredibly important question we all ask ourselves when we look at new companies from a financing perspective.
Yeah, so let's stay with that thought a little bit, because when we talk about, we're trying to identify the companies that are affected. Obviously, you mentioned things like an opportunity where people are, there's still a lot of investment in cloud-based technologies and similar implementations. But then obviously these technology companies have customers of their own, many of whom are in industries which are more affected by this situation and who structurally could change quite a bit.
Right.
The whole, people are talking about what is happening to commercial real estate, what is happening to other white collar industries.
That's right.
And that is going to affect obviously the customer set or the market availability for these companies. Are you seeing any specific trends at this early stage of this, in this changed world?
Yeah, undoubtedly, right. That's why it's very difficult, even that flips to the other side of the portfolio too. It becomes very difficult to truly handicap what the rest of the year is going to look like. Are existing customers going to renew their purchases here? Or what is the likelihood of closing new deals going to look like? We all are in completely uncharted waters in terms of what, and it's going to be a function of what industry is that company. And I've got a company that was selling into enterprises that were supporting the hospitality sector. And obviously, it's a very difficult place to close more deals and so on. So it's definitely going to be very industry specific as to what's going to happen. So very much caution is the name of the game. So especially if you're looking at companies with meaningful revenues today, it's very difficult to handicap what the rest of the year is going to look like. So venture capitalists that look at companies with real revenues are going to handicap what revenues are going to be for the rest of the year, what growth prospects are going to be like in 21. So there is going to be a little bit of a disconnect between what an entrepreneur is going to expect from I believe in these kind of revenues and this kind of valuation versus venture guys are going to discount that quite a bit given the uncertainty and the caution that's there in the environment, and it's going to end up at a different spot.
Do you look at valuations differently right now for potential investments?
Well, it's more because even if, look, early stage venture has never been about truly about running a discounted cash flow model, right? But you would definitely handicap what the rest of the year, next 12 months is going to look like.
Yeah.
So you worry about if the company doesn't have that kind of growth momentum, like you might have expected in normal times, the next round of financing might not fetch a great price either. So you think of some level of a lower price for investing in companies because you're simply nervous about what the future prospects are going to be like. So in other words, you are going to price in the level of uncertainty here when you look at these companies, just because there is no way to have any firm conviction on what top line is going to be for these businesses.
Right. And then on the flip side, these companies, are they going to have to raise or keep a larger cash reserve because because of the uncertainty, you're going to need a longer runway?
Oh, absolutely. One of the first things we did, this was literally second week of March, was a complete manic work to go ensure that companies were funded for the next year, that we didn't have to raise capital for these businesses till Q2 of next year. Right. And it was complete under much more dire top line performance of these businesses, where can we slightly trim expenses? Let's get more cautious. If there are debt lines to be put in place, let's go put in debt lines in place with commercial banks and so on, with venture lending firms. So we've gone all out to make sure that almost all our companies would have runways that went beyond Q1 of next year.
Right.
So so any new financings we look at and investing in businesses, we want them to have operating runways through end of next year, therefore, so that any financing that happens for a company right now. So people who raise capital today, I would urge you all to be more cautious about what top line would be, and therefore manage expenses, spend accordingly, and commensurate and correspondingly go raise capital to extend runway through end of next year, ideally, is what I would recommend to entrepreneurs.
Okay, that's good. Let's go to questions. Let me stay here. We have a question that goes back to the beginning of the session, more about early stage. This question's from Pramod Pillai. He says, Krishna, thank you for your time today. Good to hear from you. 2 questions. How do you define early stage, and at what point in early stage do you get involved? And 2, have you funded blockchain for business-based startups? And if so, what kind of traction have you seen? So let's take the first one, which is at what point do you get involved, and what is early stage?
Yeah, we're classic early stage investors, and that means we have backed companies with a single entrepreneur to companies that have had maybe $3-4 million in revenues by the time we invest in them. Of a commonality across both of them is in that spectrum is that we are first institutional capital in them. In other words, they might have bootstrapped their way to $3-4 million. They might have taken angel investors to get to $3-4 million, but we are the first institutional investor. So that's the model that we like to be in. I would say the preponderance of companies, I would say 90% of our companies are definitely below $1 million in revenues. In fact, most of them are below $50,000 a month in revenues typically when we get to them. Right. But I would say a third of the companies we invested in were pre-revenue in their nature. But the ones when we invest in the pre-revenue context, they end up being pretty strong entrepreneur bets, right? These are people who've been there, done that, and have a special insight from their past history of doing that they bring to the table. So in other words, if you combine the combination of when you back a company, there is X points for entrepreneur and the Y points for traction for a business. You would compromise on traction that they have if there is significant amount of prior credibility for the entrepreneur based on what they've done before. And if it's a first-time entrepreneur, we have no prior connection at all, then you look for at least some evidence of product market fit before you would back that company, right? Because you'd like to have some evidence that their insight is spot on with respect to what opportunity looks like. So that's a classic early stage investment approach. Of course, the twist is that we look for that to be in Texas.
So for the proven entrepreneur, you will take their idea on a napkin.
Yeah, absolutely. We back the most recent one we did was Homeward, for example. We've known the entrepreneur for a long time. We backed a single guy with a $2 million investment in December of 2018. And that company just raised, even during these difficult times, they raised $105 million financing, combination of equity and debt, because the entrepreneur has gone on to execute phenomenally well, just as in line with our hypothesis for what they can do from when we made the investment.
Yeah. The second part of the question was, have you funded blockchain for business-based startups?
We've looked at a lot of blockchain companies. I think the way we think about blockchain from an enterprise perspective is, more importantly, are they solving a true enterprise business need? And if blockchain is a good way of doing a distributed ledger to go solve it, it's well and good, but we don't do things for the sake of blockchain for the blockchain's sake. It's much more around, are we solving a true fundamental enterprise need that truly needs all the elements of what blockchain has to offer? Yeah. So having said that, we've got companies that are on the periphery of what blockchain does, as opposed to being a massive crypto style approach, doing things with a specialized currency and so on. We don't have anything in the portfolio.
Okay, good. Let's go to just some things that that Live Oak Ventures is doing and other similar venture capitalists and investors are doing to help their portfolio companies navigate through these rocky waters right now? What are there, specific things that you've been involved in, both in terms of, ensuring that, I think right now preserving talent is probably less of an issue, but certainly preserving the culture and trying to ensure that, companies are still following a disciplined process in these hard times. Are there specific things that you've been working on or that you see, especially with young companies in your portfolio?
Sure. I think the first thing we did, like I briefly mentioned, was we were all out into scenario planning mode. We are typically the most active investors on the board of any company. So went into massive number of iterations of what operating plans look like for the business to go rationalize to make sure that we can be a good sounding board for our CEOs on what plans ought to look like for companies that they execute. That was step number one. Number two is, then look for all possible source of capital available, make introductions to everything from venture debt providers to should they be capitalizing on the PPP, for example, in some instances, and go figure out more streamlined processes to go make all that happen. Again, to add to the operating runway so that we don't have to completely reduce headcount too much, so that hopefully it's a temporary dip and you can come back and be prepared for that. And then we've been doing a lot of things like like we had a webinar, for example, on how do you manage customer churn in the current environment.
Yeah.
Can you bringing in best practices, bringing in experts to talk, share ideas, share best practices amongst people, so that incredibly what is topical. Our Slack channel for the portfolio has been super active in terms of people asking questions of each other and so on. And a lot of good ideas with respect to enhancing culture, like you talked about, right? It can be very difficult for companies that have had lots of people working in, and building the team ability. How do you maintain that in a highly distributed setting? Lots of great ideas have come out of our Slack channels between CEOs, and we've been helping implement some of those ideas here so that you can create a team culture to be as vibrant as it used to be.
Yeah. You talked about, retaining customers and minimizing churn. Any guerrilla marketing or customer retention or acquisition ideas or strategies that you can share here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's probably one of the, it's hard enough to sell new business, but it's even more important at this time to not to lose existing customers who we have invested so much. So I think churn management, churn minimization is even more important. At least people will say, fine, it's a flat business. There's a lot more sympathy on companies being flat, right? Instead of growing, but try not to lose customers is supremely important. So everything from let's show incredibly more empathy for our customers of our portfolio companies. Let's be very open-minded about should you defer payments? Should you make them to be heroes? Is an important one. A lot of our companies think about how do you make their customers a hero here, because they're all trying to retain their jobs in the first place. Yeah. So if you have a marketing software company, you take your marketing software and make this about how do you do marketing spend rationalization using our product, right? If you've got a talent management software company, use the talent management software to help with succession planning and skills rationalization in the current environment. So a common observation is that all of enterprises are all looking for ways to continue to be relevant in their respective jobs, and they all want to be looked at as heroes in their respective companies during these troubled times. So what can our companies do with respect to taking the product and coming out with interesting case studies to be able to help their sponsors and their companies become heroes here, and while trying to show financial flexibility for in terms of payment terms, etc., are all typical things we've been working on with respect to churn management and churn avoidance.
Okay. Another question, Ashish Gupta has a question, and I think you may have answered some portion of this. What is some tangible advice you are giving your portfolio company executives on how to navigate and thrive during this time? And I think you answered some of it, But any other thoughts on that along those lines?
I think, we talked about some of the tactical operating aspects of it, and definitely there are elements around culture is definitely a challenging one, right? How do you bring people together here at a time when people are feeling super disconnected from the company is important, and people are, we've had, on our Slack postings, for example, people have tried to organize company events.
Yeah.
Maybe there is a, as basic as a happy hour musician that they go and find, and people do Venmo to their accounts, and that goes into a charity, for example, in these times. So that there are still collective events that people can come together and feel a sense of camaraderie, even today. Maybe in the future, they're still working from home. Maybe they'll still have a social happy hour someplace, but trying to create instances where people can come together. And number two is just, trying to, this is something which all of you who are running companies obviously know this, trying to go make actual, use video as much as possible as opposed to phone calls and so on, and try to continue to create the linkage and bonds with your employees. Are all things that many of our best CEOs do.
Yeah, so a related issue, as people have talked about the fact that there are some things that are going to change permanently, and one of the things is the huge impact of the virus situation is having on white collar work. A lot of that was already prior to the virus. There were forecasts that over 5-10 years, increasing amounts of white collar work will become remote. This has certainly accelerated that. And that is obviously having a huge impact on the culture as people are doing more remote meetings and Zoom meetings. Obviously large enterprises, the culture is slightly different than what you have for startups. But do you see that, if it becomes permanent, and software is certainly one of the areas that it's a lot easier for people to work remotely. And therefore, do you see, that culture change is, becoming a permanent thing?
No, it's fascinating, right? We had companies which were sworn believers that we will never remote something. The culture of everybody coming together is supremely important was a common theme that people had. Yeah. People are gone to the other end of the spectrum here, right? They're much more open about work from home, much more open about distributed workforces and so on. I don't think we really understand how dramatically all of this is going to change in the next 6 months or 12 months. Yeah. We all know we all gotten used to a certain, we all been forced to adapt to a certain different style of functioning. And I don't think we have any comprehension of what it's going to look like. And I don't even know how to think about white collar type jobs here, Tejas. In one sense, look, you can be in Texas and work for a New York company much more easily, or for a Bay Area company much more easily here than ever before. And so there is nothing called you got to be local to the market. So maybe we are seeing this continued talent growth here or migration here to Texas and Austin in particular. Maybe we'll be okay. I'm sure it'll be a geographic phenomenon in terms of how all this gets played out.
Yeah, so there are a whole bunch of questions. I'm going to go to them, but I have one question relating to that. Even prior to this situation, before the virus situation, one of the things that was happening was that, Austin, especially in the software world, talent was becoming much more expensive, and more companies were looking at, outsourcing, near sourcing, things of that sort. Do you see this, with more people being able to work remotely? I know, I've talked to a couple of other entrepreneurs. I know we are looking at the same thing, which is the ability to, since people are working remotely, whether you are, 2 blocks away or 2 states away, it really doesn't matter. But hopefully we are paying less money for somebody 2 states away. Is that something that you see as a permanent trend?
Oh, absolutely. We definitely see that as a permanent trend. But I know, look, people are getting more used to the notion that you can remote work like this. But, I'm also seeing a faster migration of amazing talent now moving from, I've had a lot of people reach out to me saying, look, I'm just moving from New York to Austin. We don't want to be in the city anymore, right? Yeah. And so at the more senior levels, who could be founders and catalysts of forming companies and so on, I see a bigger surge of that kind of migration here into this market. So maybe at the lower levels of the foot soldiers who could be hired for programming and so on and go more distributed. But the secular trends with respect to this market in Austin overall looks positive, because maybe we were bursting at the seams with respect to availability of talent for writing software. Now we can go global with that. Also being
Krishna, I think we lost you.
at levels to drive more entrepreneurship in the future. You lose me?
I think we got you back.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm saying, I'm not sure where you want me to rewind. I'm just saying that we are net importers of talent here, right?
Okay.
I just feel like it's just going to be net positive for Austin, is my sense here going forward.
Okay, great. Okay, let me go. I have a question from Srikant Chintala. Do you focus primarily on B2C, B2B2C, or B2B at Live Oak? And relate to that, basically wanted to get your thoughts on the overall impact on B2B versus B2C on this whole aggregate macro environment.
Right. So our philosophy broadly is, look, we are Texas first, and we can work with local companies, and the talent set in this market is enterprise oriented, of course, which is broadly means B2B in general. So as a result, our portfolio has got a much heavier skew towards enterprise and B2B in general. Of course, we're seeing the early origins of good B2C talent migrating here to this market, etc.
I think we lost
but,
you.
that's still progress on. So, oh no.
There's a little bit, I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm the only one that's seeing it, or that, but we're kind of getting a little patchy, but I think you're back.
Yeah, I think you're going in and out a little bit, Krishna.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll keep trucking.
Yeah, let's just continue.
Hopefully it's a momentary problem. Okay, we have a question from Srikant Rama. Krishna, two questions.
If it gets too bad, I should get the gang who's downloading some YouTube videos in the house to stop doing that right now.
There you go. Or some intense gaming.
Exactly.
Yeah. Krishna, two questions from Srikant Rama. Are VCs slowing their exits this year? And has there been a more realistic and cautious valuation now than the last couple of years?
It's very difficult to bet on exits at this time,
Okay.
So none of us should expect exits to happen, given everyone's going to be super cautious. Unless there is a deal in play at this time, I don't think we just can't count anything at all at this time.
Okay. A question from Rish Lotlikar. What do you think about the trend that companies are moving to more distributed models due to COVID-19? Do you think investors in general are going to be less regionally focused in terms of their investments? And how do you see that?
First part is, yes, companies are going to be much more dispersed, undoubtedly. Everyone's more comfortable about that. So I think, Harish, still believe the world will sort of come back to some level of hybrid normalcy, right? Where you will still have the key movers, hopefully in one geography, then managing distributed talent across a spectrum is likely what will happen. So, so I think there will still be a little bit of a regional bias, in my opinion, so that you can find people, interesting talent at the senior levels who are movers and shakers, who are the key drivers of companies being local. So I think it'll be still a quasi-regional phenomenon. You still want to ultimately meet people in the flesh before you write a check to them. And you can only do so much on Zoom calls. So I think, they'll still be wanting to do that on a localized basis, especially with respect to founding teams, is probably a requirement.
Yeah, and I think you had mentioned, at least for funding, I saw an interview, I think, in one of the media where you had given an interview and you were talking about, the fact that you're not able to do enough face-to-face meetings for potential investment opportunities. And obviously that's something that means a lot to you.
Yeah, still, old school in nature, maybe Tejas, we still have, we have done, we're about to do 4 investments during this, during the COVID period by the end of, by middle of July,
Right.
starting beginning of March. All of them we knew entrepreneurs we have known from before.
Right.
We've not done one yet where it's completely on Zoom. We're getting serious about one company, and we actually have a face-to-face meeting with the team on Thursday, all wearing masks. We'll go do that.
Yeah.
But I think, we still need, this is such a people bet business. It's not about, look, show me a business plan and show me numbers and make investment judgment. It is so heavily around people and making bets on people. So I just don't know how you get away from that element of it. We are very much a make a bet on founders first, and then segments and operating plans come much later in the equation.
Right.
And so we just got to go make that happen for us before we write a check into somebody like that.
Yeah. There's a question from JC Williams. He says, we recently began supporting early scale-ups and mid-market tech companies from Mexico and Latin America to enter and grow in the US via Austin, AI, fintech, analytics, telehealth, collaboration. What is your opinion of the tech and innovation scene in this region? So are there specific industries that, especially with your focus on Texas entrepreneurs, are there specific things that you see that are, that this is fertile ground for?
Yeah, I think the elements where we are very distinctive are this broadly, you got strong development talent here in this market. So long tail of software people, because they're also getting moved here by the large companies, etc. There's tremendous software talent available here. Also significantly, there is a tremendous amount of sales and marketing talent available here, especially for things like inside sales, how to do demand gen appropriately for the enterprise sales motion is very strong in this market. And so things that you listed, JC, are all things that can benefit immensely from having a small, medium business oriented enterprise sales force. So there's tremendous amount of talent here in this market for the entire life cycle of how do you generate demand, how do you sell to them, how do you retain them, how do you deliver customer success for them, are all very strong skill sets of the Austin market.
Okay. There were a couple of questions I think that you answered that have to do with the culture. I have a question from Suktik. He says, I'm Suktik. I'm a 17-year-old entrepreneur. You spoke about promoting camaraderie. How will that sense of community among a team or company look 6 months down the road? Yeah, you have a budding entrepreneur who's, ready to jump right in.
Yeah, 6 months down the line, I think, there's no spend. If you're doing a startup and you're 17 and you got a bunch of people, maybe you're only working from home, I would urge you all to start the day with a 30-minute, an hour-long standing meeting to get aligned on priorities. That way there is a real connection on what's going on, what's important, how to prioritize. And that way you keep that cadence of meetings going. And that way everyone is pretty aligned on company direction. And maybe that'll be a way to continue to have and maintain that sense of camaraderie even for 3-6 months or so, even if you all are not at all working out of a common office.
Okay. Krishna, let me just switch gears. I'll come back to some of the questions here in a second. Obviously a big aspect of the news the last 3 weeks has been, all this discussion about, race equality and equity in this country and in other countries. If I look at statistics, 12% of the country's population are African Americans, yet less than 1% of investment capital goes into minority businesses. Obviously there's a new awareness right now. Yeah. What can the investment community do to enable more minority-owned businesses to start and flourish?
It's a great question, Tejas. I think it's very difficult. The answer to this is not that funds like us should go set aside some pot of money to only invest in minority businesses, because that's not why a public pension fund invests in us, right? Because they don't invest in us that we have some sort of a minority mandate to go invest.
Right.
But having said that, there are lots of smart people in these communities. The problem, in my humble opinion at least, is there is a top of the funnel problem, which is if you think of our own, we meet with lots and lots of early people in early stages of ideas, from 17-year-olds wanting to start a company to people doing this for the first time and so on. And then they make progress, they move down the funnel, right? And then they get more and more advanced in their ideation process and execution process. And ultimately it comes to a certain level of a critical mass of an idea when we make an investment in these things, correct? So if you think of that to be an investment funnel, what we see is fundamentally a top of the funnel problem. Are minority communities, right, do they have enough resources to even take the first baby steps towards how to think about a business plan, right? What would, do they feel very threatened that, look, we don't have the confidence to go even pitch to venture capitalists? There are so many companies we invest in today where the first meeting I had with the entrepreneur was 6 years ago, right? And we gave them feedback. Maybe they abandoned that idea. They learned from that idea. They went and started the next company. And then they met us multiple times with that idea. And then we invested in them. So I have we don't see enough of minority entrepreneurs who are even approaching us at the early times of when they even ideate and think about these things.
Right.
So what we need to do as a society is, how do you break down the barriers? How do you make it better, easier for such people? How do we make ourselves more accessible to those entrepreneurs? One of the things we have been debating is, let's open up office hours much more aggressively and set up slots in the calendar for minority entrepreneurs, right? And so that people feel less of a barrier to come and talk to folks like us. Things don't have to be supremely well polished before they come and talk to us. Happy to take an early meeting, happy to give you some early feedback, happy to set you on a course where things get better and more advanced. And maybe, 2-3 years down the line, things get to be a state where it is fundable by institution guys like us. And so I think, I really call this go tackle the top of the funnel situation on a societal basis, and as firms here too.
So let me put in this is a timely time to put in a small plug for Ty and Ty Austin, because one of the initiatives that certainly we are trying to focus on is reaching out to minority communities, even starting at the college level, working with people like Houston Tillotson, et cetera. So maybe, I'll let Jayashree drive that, but that might be something that we could work with you, and that, if we have a process where we have some potential entrepreneurs, and if you have, these office hours, maybe we could just set up a session periodically where, they can get advice, and not, with like-minded firms like yours. But I think that's, I think absolutely, I think there would be general agreement that I think as a society, we need to be more creative in making sure. And by the way, that this also applies to, I don't know how much you folks are seeing, but, women entrepreneurs.
Oh, very much so.
And not even in tech, but, a large percentage of women entrepreneurs are looking at, at-home businesses and things of that sort.
So we do have some of these come across us, Ty, Austin, Krishna, and we are trying to give them as much mentoring, or even as the basics, like you said, for the business plan or understanding of financials, just the basics. We have started doing that. We are trying to match them up with our mentors and our, through our network. But it'll be great, as Tejas suggested, if we can reach out to you and like other ventures like yours, and set up something, more concrete, honestly. Thank you.
Absolutely, Jayashree. Very, very happy to be of help in that regard.
Thank you.
This actually originally came about, Tejas and Jayashree, because of our observations around women entrepreneurs. When we created a panel of a dozen women entrepreneurs, some successful, some emerging, and found out what can you do differently to be able to be more accessible. And out of that came a whole bunch of initiatives around creating these blocks. And I think the problems and the challenges there from a top of the funnel situation there are very applicable to minority entrepreneurs in general as well. So anything we can all do to help, lubricate the path for them to start early conversations and iterate and learn by doing, that will, start to bear fruit somewhere years down the line here is what will happen.
Right. So we have are a combination of women, Hispanics, and African Americans. All three come. Just FYI. Okay. Thank you. You can go ahead, Dave. Yeah.
Hey, Krishna, before I go to questions, can I impose on you, do you have a hard stop at 9, or can we go a little, because we have a bunch of questions? So
Absolutely.
we may go over to the audience. We'll try and get to as many questions as possible.
Sure.
And thanks for your time. Okay, a question from Bhavna Gaglani. One of the things that we all keep hearing of and talking of is the second order effect of this new world, this way of living and working, running businesses. Given your vantage point, look into the crystal ball for us and tell us what you see, what excites you.
Oh my God.
No pressure. We're just asking you to, forecast the world.
Exactly, Bhavna. If I could do that, I don't know. I think we are obviously there is all, in my baby world of how we think about it, right? To be honest, venture guys are not great at being super creative and super prescriptive on where the world is going, right? And especially, we are much more around, we have some patterns on, look, is that segment going to be interesting or not, right? And we obviously like things like I said, enabling the cloud, enabling security, enabling tele blank, and then supply chain logistics to deal with people's changing buying patterns. We have a long list of areas that should be more interesting in this new normal of the world. But it's not like we'll run around and start companies around those specific areas. We're very driven by, is there an entrepreneur who's seizing upon that insight to come and talk to us? And that's how we'd go about it. I think, the lens very much is, we all know we're going to persist either because we are forced to, or because we have found this new way of operating more convenient. And that's just going to trigger very different ways of work, very different styles of consumption is all going to happen. So we can only kind of, scenario play in modified ways, which look like some hybrid way of living between where we live today versus where we used to live in January. It's going to be somewhere in between the two. And how relevant is this product, service that some entrepreneur is talking to us about, and how is it going to be? And that definitely guides a lot of our thinking in terms of our decision making on companies.
Yeah, and so relating to that, I think there were certain trends that were probably already happening and in place prior to this that might possibly be accelerated a little bit due to this crisis, and then there might be some that probably have been thrown off track.
Undoubtedly. Retailing is not going to be the same at all, and
exactly
direct to consumer for all kinds of people. The field has gotten much more leveled, and just because you got a big store, that means nothing at all, right? And so there are definitely a lot of changes that are coming our way here in terms of how we go operate and how we're going to consume products and services.
Okay. All right, let me go to another question from Sanjay Balasundaram. Thank you for your time and insights today. I have a rather tangential question on the human side of the equation. We're expecting CEOs of your portfolio companies to quickly pivot and adapt to the new order of things. To what degree do you think a mental health resource, for example, an EQ or psychological counseling or stress management resource, might be valued or even recommended to leadership teams in your portfolio companies now and perhaps into the foreseeable future?
It's a legitimate question. We all don't understand the human toll of all these things, and definitely our CEOs under much more pressure. We can definitely see the sinusoidal variations in their outlook as venture guys are everything from board members, business advisors, philosophers, psychiatrists. So I end up doing a lot of things on a typical day here, undoubtedly. So it's just all of that. So there's definitely a mental health concern. You definitely see a lot of mental health startups blossoming today. Telepsychiatry is exploding in interest. So I can definitely see that to be all, so we're not going about this saying we are not prescribing anything like that, but we definitely talk about the importance of how do you manage culture? How do you maintain culture in a company? How do you keep people feeling more positive? Are we doing enough of that? Are all things we explore with our management teams? But there's nothing we are doing on a more institutional basis. And maybe that ought to be a topic for our future webinar in the portfolio, is to get someone to come and talk about this. So if any of you have ideas for someone who can do that, drop me a note, and would definitely be open to doing that.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be great. Okay, another question from Rajiv Bali. Though VCs are mainly into equity, but due to the changed circumstances and keeping precautionary safety in the background, is the appetite and focus on senior debt increasing?
Not really. You just don't. Venture guys, I'm sure there are people with distressed debt or whatever it's going to take get more active here. We are much more about, again, hopefully take a long-term perspective. It's going to take 7 to 10 years to go build a great company, and hopefully we are not stuck in neutral gear as a world for that duration. So I think we're much more about equity ownerships and how do you build a long-term business is very much the emphasis.
So I have a related question on the issue of distressed companies and distressed startups. Is there a movement, or is there a market for, and maybe not for Live Oak Ventures or companies like yourselves, but is there a market for companies or investors buying distressed startups at a discount because they think that they can reduce the cost by moving development resources offshore, or combining companies and things of that sort?
Right. Look, here in town, we all know Joe Lamont did a phenomenal job of doing something like that, right? Find software companies and strip out incredible amount of expenses and use development resources in a place like India and go make that happen. So I'm sure there are a lot of smart people who go figure out how to extract efficiency out of that. Our purest approach to doing these things would say that, look, ultimately we are backing a founding team. We are not operators. We know where we live in the stack. Right. We're all about trying to drive, partner with great founders to go make amazing things happen here. So with that perspective, we are not going to find distressed businesses and buy them and go run them here. If you expect to back a founder that's got the ability and the chops to go rationalize resources in the first place and do the best things possible in those companies, that would be the mindset for folks like us.
So you've not been approached by anybody saying, hey, do you have any distressed companies that you want to get rid of from your portfolio?
Yeah, that'll happen. We always have bottom feeders who are, I don't want to name names. There are software companies that are conglomerates of lots and lots of little bitty software companies, which, people will approach us to say, can we buy this thing at 1 or 2 times the revenues here and take it off your hands? We undoubtedly will happen more. But it's not our investment strategy.
Sure. No, I understand that. Right. Got it. Okay. A question from Varun Pandit. Yeah.
Can we take 1 or 2 more? And then there are people dropping off, so I do need to get on some of the couple of other things.
All right. I'll do 2 more questions if that's okay. All right. I'll take a question from Varun Pandit. Thanks, Krishna, for your time. Quick question on your thoughts and investment strategy in regards to all up cloud investing, as COVID is forcing digital transformation for businesses and companies to move to the cloud. What are your thoughts on IaaS, PaaS segment investing in the coming years as the transition accelerates?
Infrastructure service and platform as a service are all plays that have been playing out for the last 10 plus years. We'll continue to have those trends happen pretty aggressively. So, that's all falls into the category of cloud infrastructure enablement, cybersecurity enablement, are all things which will happen extensively in the future. Great areas to continue to do things in.
Okay. Last question, Ashish Gupta asks, do you see any material changes in corporate governance with early stage companies? Examples in the past, ESG, impact statement, independent directors, follow on ROFRRs, etc.
Not from a traditional governance perspective. Obviously, we think even more about, gosh, we have to have diversified boards,
Right.
especially as companies are marching their way towards being public and getting to any kind of scale. It's completely not a nice to have anymore when you are, companies at scale. And so you would, that's definitely, women and people of color being on the boards is like supremely important going forward. Maybe that's one place we'll plays a lot more importance going forward.
Great. I actually have a whole list of questions. We'll have to do a next session with you. But Krishna, thank you very much for your time. I know, this was most useful, and I'll turn it over back to Jayashree, and I know we have some information to share with you.
Thanks, Krishna, and just bear with us if you can stay on for a few more minutes. I have Devan Desai. You have a question up there. Please contact us at Thai Austin. We can direct you and guide you for that. And then there is one more question from Shri Chintala about the business plan. You know how resourceful we are. You should already know by now, Shri. So definitely get to me, and then we'll get taken care of that too for you, okay? Thank you all for participating and a lively discussion here. Thank you, Tejas. Thank you, Krishna, most of all. Do appreciate it. It's always great pleasure to talk to you. And we will have to bring you on again if you don't mind, because there are lots of questions that Tejas and I had on the, prepared sheets, and I don't think we have even remotely touched on those. So otherwise we'll do one-on-one with you or something. People who are there, still participants who are live, if you think of any other questions, or if you thought that your question wasn't answered rightly or completely, please send an email to us at Thai Austin, webinars@austin.thai.org. We have a dedicated email ID for these kind of questions. We will send them out to Krishna. We will coordinate with him, and we will get your questions answered by him. So please do that. We do want that to happen. A recording of this webinar will be posted on Thai Austin website, and that'll be posted, and we'll send out an email to all of you, but will be posted. So if you need to look for that, definitely, it'll be posted by end of this week anyway. And then do tune in for our next webinar. We have, this is a webinar that Thai Austin is organizing. However, this is going to be a Thai global seminar because the appeal is 110% global. We have Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw coming and talking to us on July 29th. She just was awarded the EY World Entrepreneur of the Year. And you all probably have read, she was on CNBC interviewed today, in fact. And so if you want to check her out, please do. And we definitely want you to be present at this webinar. And she's going to be talking about compassionate capitalism, which is a great twist, and a lot of entrepreneurs today are thinking and pivoting to that, that particular term. And Kiran is the one who actually coined this term for entrepreneurship. So definitely tune in. Couple of things that Thai Austin is definitely a membership-based organization. So whoever is attending this webinar and who are not members, we do want you to join us as members. Please go to our website, easy to navigate. We have a lot of added values to members, which you will find there. And let's see, reach out. Okay, any other entrepreneurship needs you might have, or any of you might have, even like if it is a business idea validation, if you have a concept in mind or anything, Ty Austin can help you. We will put you through the right mentorship and everything and validate whatever you need. So please do reach out to us. We are here for you, entrepreneurs and budding entrepreneurs. And kudos to Suptik. I do want to say thank you, Suptik, the 17-year-old entrepreneur who came on board today on the webinar and asked the question. Thank you, Suptik. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Krishna, again, and good night, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you very much. Thanks again.
Thanks, Krishna. Appreciate it.
Great questions. Thanks a lot. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.